Now, when we look at time management, remember, you would always have time for things that are important to you. You will never have time for everything, but you always have time for things that are important to you. So, this means time management has to do with prioritizing, right? Getting your priorities right. Once you prioritize correctly, you'll be able to allocate your time in the right way. Now, the goal of time management is not to go through a list. Please remember this. The goal of time management is not to go through an entire list. The goal of time management is fulfillment. Fulfillment. This means at the end of the day, you want to feel fulfilled. Have you been there where you worked all day, so hard, you stayed late, but for some reason on your way home, you still felt you had not gotten anything done? Why? We didn't prioritize. So time management, the focus is prioritizing, and the outcome is fulfillment. So how do you then prioritize? It's what we call the principle of the sand and the rock. The sand and the rocks. Let me explain. If I gave you 3 buckets, first, an empty bucket. What color? Let's say red. Second, a bucket full of big rocks, maybe a blue bucket. Third, a bucket full of sand, maybe a yellow bucket. And I told you, hey, fill this red bucket, the first bucket, with the rocks and the sand. Question: what would you put first? Would you put the rocks first, or you put the sand first? What you put first will determine if you would fill that bucket eventually. If you put the sand first, what happens? The rocks will not get in. But if you put the rocks first, the sand will find its way through the sides of the rocks. So this means in time management, what we do first is the most important thing. What you do first. Leaving important activities for much later would lead to unfulfillment, right? But focusing on getting your most important activities first will lead to what? Fulfillment. Now, how do you know what to put first? The activities that have the greatest rewards or the greatest consequences is what you put first. There's a popular saying that says, do not schedule every appointment. Schedule only your rocks. Now, you know what the rocks are, right? Those top priority activities. Schedule them. So if you're going to come up with a list of things to accomplish for the day, decide, ask yourself, what are my rocks for today? What are those very important activities? Come up with a list. When you come up with a list, start to label them. Okay, so when you've come up with a list of maybe 10 things you want to accomplish for the day, maybe you have a lot of work to do, a lot of requests, 10 things you want to do for the day. You would use what we call the ABCDE rule for prioritizing. A are your must activities, things you must do. If you don't do this, it could lose you your job. Must. B are things you should do. These should activities, if you don't do them now, the consequences are not immediate, but they are over time. Things like reading, exercising, planning. Over time, you would face the consequences of not having your B activities. C are things that are nice to do. They're just nice to do, You don't have to do them, but they're nice to do. D are things you should delegate. And E are things you should eliminate. So, when you've come up with your list of activities for the day, you then need to identify, where are my A activities first? So probably you have 2 A activities here. You would also look at, where are my B activities? You then label 2. Probably these are your B activities. You look at, what are my C activities? you label them. So on and so forth for D and for E also. So for your A activities, you then start between this A and this A, which is more important. If it's this, you label it A1. After you label this A1, you call the next one A2. You do the same for everything, B1, B2, B3, all in order of priority. Then you come up with another list that you're going to work with for that day. Then you start A1, A2, B1. You bring all your A1, A2, B1, B2 activities on another list. Then you focus on all the A1 activities. Now, if the only thing you do that day is just the A1 activities, at the end of the day, you would realize that you're fulfilled. So you don't move to any other activity until you've completely finished this. Now someone says, what if I have a lot of things that come up in my day to interrupt my schedule? What if I already planned my day, yet my boss gives me something else to do, or a client calls me for an urgent meeting, or I realize that I have to do two things at the same time. Now, no matter what happens, if there's any distraction and an ad hoc activity comes in, a client calls you, go for the meetings, do all those things. If you, based on the consequences of those things not being done. But the point is, always remember that, hey, when you're back or when you're done with those activities, come back to ensure you have completed your A1 activity. Once you do this, you'll discover that time management is not about going through a list, but it's about doing the most important activity, which guarantees you fulfillment on the job.